because I remember the second one had just been ordered. Is there another? In the back.
Well, yeah, we'll pretend it's a surprise.
Okay.
Put it?
Well, say something, because they're all looking expectant.
Before we start, I'm just going to give it another couple minutes for people who may have had trouble with the tube or trouble finding their way through SSEES. So we'll start in about 3 minutes, okay? Talk amongst yourselves. I'll give you a theme.
What are you doing? Should be originálu,
Co vás přivedlo na Hrabal?
No, já protože to tehdy vyšla v literárkách jeho první povídka Automacie, teda první široce publikovaná. No a to nějak holky točili večer v táboráku a to bylo neuvěřitelné. Od té doby jsem jich přečetl.
Zkoušel jste to někdy číst v angličtině? Já se vracím k těm českým věcem.
Nedej, tak já už jsem Hrabala nečetl, musím říct.
Nebyl můj, ale pro jistotu.
Vždycky říkal, bych to vypnul, říkám, že stejně nikdo nevolá. Vy jste na škole tady?
Ne, já pracuji v Českém centru.
Aha. Já jsem tomu zůstal, moje paní dost komunikuje s těma dne, dávala z českého centra. Já jsem Stáně, moje žena je Stáně. My se jak staráme o...
No, vy teďka máte nový prostory, že jo?
Okay. Okay, well, I see our final stragglers have come in, so I think we'll get started. First, allow me to welcome you all to the School of Slavonic and East European Studies at UCL. My name is Peter Zusi, and I teach Czech and Slovak literature here. And it's a great pleasure to be able to host this event where we effectively will be combining sort of two wonderful occasions. And one is a book launch, which will be the first part of our evening of translations of stories by Hrabal, which have been translated by David Short, a longtime colleague here and familiar to anybody who has read Czech literature in English translation, at the very least. And then we will move on to announcing the winner of a Hrabal translation competition, which the Czech Center in London organized. So that will be the general order of the evening. I'm going to start off briefly. I want to say some words. I'm going to just, I don't want to take up too much time, but what I wanted to do, I'm assuming that since people are here, everybody knows who Hrabal is. I don't need to give sort of background information on that. You wouldn't be here if you weren't already interested in Hrabal. So what I wanted to do instead was just read a bit from one of his best known and most admired works, in English, I Serve the King of England, and just say a few words about these passages that may suggest at least some of the things that I find very typical and very sort of enchanting about Hrabal's work. And then I'm going to pass the non-existent microphone on to David, over to David, and ask him to say some words about the actual process of translating Hrabal, and then we'll hear some passages from the book. Okay. Many of you are probably familiar with this work. It's a remarkable work that sort of follows the adventures of a very curious anti-hero as he's battered around by some of the historical winds that sort of blow through Czechoslovakia in the 20th century, from the 1930s through World War II, and then on through the communist period. And I just wanted to read sort of extended passage that effectively is one extended metaphor, where this young character who's a sort of menial, at this stage, a menial employee at a hotel, encounters one of the guests who's a salesman, who represents a company that has developed this remarkable technology for creating tailor-made suits for wealthy customers. And it's a technology that means that the clients don't actually have to come in for a tailoring after at least not after the first sitting. So the passage runs like this. And this is the salesman speaking. He says, "You know, this is a revolutionary technique my boss invented. The first in the Republic, maybe even in Europe, and the whole world. And it's for officers and actors and the kind of person who doesn't have a lot of time on his hands, like yourself, sir. I just measure them and send the measurements to the workshop, where they take those strips and sew them together on a kind of tailor's dummy, with a rubber bladder inside it that's gradually pumped up until the parchment strips are filled out, and then they're covered with fast-drying glue so they harden in the shape of your torso. When they remove the bladder, your torso floats up to the ceiling of the room, permanently inflated, and they tie a cord to it, the way they do to babies in the maternity wards, so they don't get mixed up, or the way they tag the toes of corpses in the morgues of the big Prague hospitals. Then, when your turn comes, they pull your torso down and try the dresses, the uniforms, the suit coats, or whatever's been ordered on those mannequins. And they sew and refit, unstitching the seams and sewing them again without a single live fitting. And a client's mannequin is up there among several hundred colorful torsos until he dies. You can find what you're looking for by rank and profession, because the firm has divided everything into sections for generals and lieutenant colonels and captains and lieutenants and head waiters and anyone who wears formal dress. And all you have to do is come and pull on the string and the mannequin comes down like a child's balloon. And you can see exactly how someone looked when he last had a jacket or a tuxedo made to measure or alter. Sort of remarkable and very strange image. And I have no idea whether anything like this ever existed, but let's just say it may have. A similar image recurs much later in the novel, when our anti-hero has risen up in the ranks a bit. He's still working in a hotel, although not quite as menial as before. But he finds a way to sort of borrow, without permission, clothing from wealthy guests that has been stored in the hotel. And he says, "And so I started setting more store by myself than I should have. When I had time off, I would dress up, and I fell in love with neckties, the kind of ties that really make the clothes, which in turn make the man." And he borrows one particularly grand tie that apparently is sort of unequaled anywhere in Prague. And he goes prancing out in the city in it. But lo and behold, he runs into the head waiter from his hotel, who of course looks at him and knows exactly what's happened. He sees that our anti-hero has borrowed a tie without permission and is sort of presenting himself with grand airs. And Dítě, the anti-hero, sort of melts. And he says, "The sun was shining, but now it seemed to turn dark. And I felt like a lamp whose wick the head waiter had turned down, or an inflated tire whose valve he had loosened. I could hear the air hissing out of me as I walked along, and I felt that I was no longer lighting my own way, and that the tie and the handkerchief had wilted like me and were limp, as if I had just run through the rain. Now, what I'd like to suggest is that this sort of extended metaphor of inflation, which actually even occurs in the stories that, at least in some of the stories that David has translated in the volume today, is a very odd one. In the case of this novel, it reflects the fact that we're actually dealing with a main character who's morally rather odious, a social opportunist, somebody who's not above all sorts of chicanery, collaboration with Nazis during the war, trying to get ahead in order to sort of make himself feel better, make himself feel inflated. The image obviously shows his sort of obsession with appearance, with outer surfaces, with clothing, with making an impression, with trying to be something he isn't necessarily, the idea of inner emptiness, and the idea of literally giving oneself airs. This sort of moral side to the story is very clear when you read the novel. It's impossible to miss it, and certainly the end of the novel involves the final character himself learning this lesson a bit. But what I'd like to suggest is that there's something about this image, the literal buoyancy of it, the strangeness of it, the almost childlike frivolity of it, that is, for me, extremely characteristic of Hrabal. And what it reflects in the fact that it's such a sort of funny and engaging image is the fact that this morally pretty reprehensible anti-hero is in fact, he's irresistibly charming at the same time. Not in a way that makes you forgive what he's doing, but in a way that makes you see his faults in some sort of, for lack of a better word, sort of human context. And this is something that I think, for me, is extremely characteristic of Hrabal. He does not avoid moral judgments, and he writes about all sorts of extremely ambiguous types of situations and difficult historical periods. But at the same time, somehow, you never read